CTA would do on policies. First of all, I just want to correct that CTA does a lot more than policy, but I think we have hosted series of policy discourses, so possibly many people know us for that. My response to that is, and indeed you're very right, a number of times the question to, or recommendations towards government is what to do. And we assume that that becomes the subject of the policy. But the how to do it is very, very important. And I think we have moved away from, well, we are now moving away from innovations being the what to innovations being the how to do things. And that is why we are talking about innovations in trade. That's why we are talking about innovations in partnerships. That is why we are talking about innovations in financing, for example, smallholder farmers. And this is what we hope becomes inputs or elements for policy processes. I am in no way advocating for more policies, because I know there are very many beautiful policies that are sitting on the shelves of most of our governments that are not implemented. But I am an advocate of policies that are very many beautifully reviewed so that they reflect the needs and the aspirations of the citizens of the countries that we come from. So it is very, very important then that these policy discourses continue to happen so that the different stakeholders are able to generate these issues that come up, and these issues then inform the policy reviews. On the, just my remark on the protectionist support discourse, I think that has been on this morning. You protect something because you want to nurture it, right? But to nurture it, you need to support it. So I think it is not this or that. I think it's just how we smartly combine these two things. And I just want to give an example of one of the projects that we are doing in Eastern Africa, which is in Uganda. And this is a project around supporting production, and supporting production especially in grains or food commodities or food crops at this moment. Climate is one of the big things, risk is a big thing. So we developed a package around climate information services and insurance. And we hoped that the climate information services, and the people who are from Uganda possibly know the project, it's called the MOUSE project. We thought that the climate information service would help us pull in the insurance component, and then farmers will be able to buy these. But that is not the case, because the insurance component actually increases the cost of that information service. And so then what do you do? And this is where we come to the discourse around smart subsidies, and this is the public sector in partnership with the private sector that needs to engage in this discourse, develop a practice around it, and push for this in the policy reviews. So this is really how we look at it.
Thank you, Sabdia. An interesting example there. And we have Liaison Insurance, who are also one of our sponsors. They're in the house. They're also exhibiting. I think we can talk with the insurance sector later on that one. So Alejandro, you have two specific questions from the ambassador from Malawi, I believe. She said that there's talk of scrapping NAFTA. And then she also asked, do you have a real life example of how you are supporting these smallholder farmers? And then how do you create trust between private and public sector in the context of corruption? I think they are heavy questions, but Alejandro will answer them as we go to the end of this session.
Thank you. Of course, there are so many opportunities from both sides. Of course, in Mexico, we have our issues regarding the trust between government and private sector. We have strong issues regarding that. We are working on that. We worry much to grow the white that trust, we we still working on that. We disagree very much with the government programs. Uh, Believe me, but that regarding trading, you have. I saw with you, Gerard. Remember how you call that that electronic platform? So that's very amazing. I mean, that's you have here. We wish we can have. Mexico doesn't have a board of trade. There have been in the in some period of 2 decades some intentions to do, but regarding some conflicts, they're not being success. Right now there is an intention that it might be the good one. If it is not this one, maybe Mexico will go more than 1 decade or two without having a board of trade. I cannot believe Mexico having that consumption of mice doesn't have a transparent commercial policy. Really, I envy you on that, and we hope someday you can do to pay the trip to go and share that in Mexico. Therefore, we will have it. But there are so many issues that we are working on that. When you talk about your country, about your issues, if these panels were installed just like that in Mexico, I heard we have so many in common. Many programs we have in common. If we are successful, yes, we do know what we do. We know our circle. We know our times. We know our issues. But our success is because in our area, it's because we have water and we store it in the mountains. Then we download it through the timings that the corn needed. That's mainly. But Mexico as a whole country, I mean, if we have in that place an average of 10.58 tons per hectare. But if you do the average in our country, it's not 10.5. It's much less than that. It's much less. Regarding NAFTA, I agree with you, Mr. Ferra, that there is no free trade. When we have also our issues, I believe and we feel that Mexico is negotiating better, and we will be better. For instance, the corn, the maize, Mexico is the main importer of maize, and Mexico, with Japan, is the main buyer of the United States of the maize. And regarding the negotiating the NAFTA, Brazil and Argentina are very active to try to sell Mexico, to try to take that part that the United States is trying to renegotiate. And they're doing well. Mexico imports around 14 million tons. In those two countries will take that part that the United States, I don't know if he doesn't want it but Mexico will do better. But I agree in a sense with Mr. Ferrer that there is no free trade at all. There are some issues that when the United States needs to protect some sector, they do it. they do it. They just do it. Sometimes they're right on sectors, they don't do it. But mostly they just do it. Sometimes they're right on sectors, they don't do it. But mostly they just do it. Sometimes they're right on sectors, they don't do it.
that the country had a leeway to protect or not. But now we are seeing a bigger list than what was agreed on. Some of these items that we are talking about were not listed in the Common Market Protocol. So why are we not seeing the same movement of goods across the border? Some of these items that we are talking about were not listed. Is this protectionism or support? I want to give my advice. In East Africa, we have different weather patterns according to our seasonal calendars. When we have production in Tanzania, we have deficit in Uganda. We have the midway deficit, halfway production and deficit in Rwanda. So why can't we take advantage of the weather patterns and differences in seasonal calendar so that we allow our farmers to sell the surplus, marketable surplus, to where it is required, and then when they have the deficit, they can also buy where there is a surplus. I think in this way we are promoting structural trade. With this, maybe we have only representative from the East African community to see how the common market protocol can be enforced in the region so that it allows free movement of goods.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for those comments. I know there are two or so comments that have not been addressed, but we've taken note of them as the Secretariat. And this was what Dr. Kamuganga, we call him Dr. Kawich. In Kiswahili, Muganga is doctor, or a witch doctor. But he said about the question of a study to be done so that we can know what is the most efficient way to achieve food security. Is it through trade facilitation or is it through protectionism policies? I think we take that as a recommendation that as one of the things this summit will recommend, that indeed we need to commission a study, some deep analysis that can look at that. I'm sure maybe some of those studies have been done. We have some of the researchers in the house like Reshax and others, so we will revisit that. And the second issue that again was still raised by Dr. Kamuganga is the question of the three household level concerns: food security, income security, and employment security. And indeed, from the Mexico example you saw, when trade was promoted, all those issues were addressed by promoting trade. There was much more employment, there was much more income security, and there was much more food security. And indeed, you have seen from Mexico, while they export a lot, they also import. So let's do trade. And I think and say, let us trade, and there is every benefit in us trading. So with that, a big round of applause to our speakers today. I do hope that the media, this indeed was addressed to the media, the dialogue of now, and I hope that our media have been able to pick stories that they can address in terms of how are we going to rethink, reshift, and set new horizons so that we can be able to get the results that we want. And we are online, we are streaming, so those of you on Twitter, check the handles at 7th Africa Grain Trade Summit so that we can continue engaging. Let me hand over now to Janet, who is going to tell us what we do next. Thank you. Thank you very much. A big round of applause to the speakers.
Thank you very much, our speakers. Thank you, Gerard, for that session. Before our speakers leave, I would like to call our director, Silayo, Everest Silayo, to give a token to our speakers this afternoon. We can start from the end with Constantine. Thank you very much for honoring us with your presence. Thank you. Okay, face the front. Johannes, thank you very much for honoring us with your presence. Honorable, thank you very much. Okay, face the front. Johannes, thank you very much. Honorable, thank you very much. Sabdia, thank you very much for coming all the way from Netherlands to be with us. Okay, Alejandro. Chairman. Thank you as well. Thank you very much. Alejandro, thank you very much. Okay, we can release you. We can now release you speakers. Thank you very much. Kindly join my rest. So, ladies and gentlemen, we clap for our speakers for that session. We can now release you speakers. We'd like now to break for lunch. But before we go for lunch, I just have one announcement. This afternoon, we will have 2 breakout sessions at 4 o'clock. One session is on climate change and climate agriculture strategies, supported by our partner Bruna. It will be out in the afternoon, so as you walk out, please register on which session you'd like to go through from one of the sessions. The second session is a training that will be taking place mainly for the private sector, and it's a training on agribusiness risk analysis and decision making. It's a real actual training, and we are hoping that most of the private sector will also attend that session, supported by the USA's Trade and Investment Hub. We hope that you'll join that. However, after lunch, we will all convene back here for the Money Matters session, and then after that, we'll take it to groups. So with that, I'd like to release you for lunch. Karibuni sana. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, we just have 40 minutes for lunch, please. 40 minutes for lunch. Let's be back here at exactly 3:30. Let's be back at exactly 3:30.
Let's go for lunch. So that we come back and
Sana. Check, hello, 1, 2, mic test, hello, hello. Check, hello, 1, 2, mic test, hello, hello. Check, hello, 1, 2, mic test, hello, hello.
Mic check. Mic check. Ah, bado. Ngoja na test kule. Ipo okay? Mic check. Mic test, mic test. Mic check. Loni, Loni. Ngoja na test. Bado hajasikia. Okay. Mic check. Mic test, mic test. Loni, Loni. Ngoja na test. Bado hajasikia. Mic test, mic test. Loni, Loni. Loni, Loni, Loni. Mic test, mic test. Loni. Mic test, mic test. Loni, Loni, Loni. Mic test, mic test. Hata simsikii. Loni. Mic test, mic test. Loni, Loni, Loni. Mic test, mic test. Loni, Loni. Loni. Mic test, mic test. Mic test, mic test. Loni, Loni. Mic
Hello,
test,
vipi
mic
uko unasikia vizuri?
Loni.
Iko sawa?
Loni.
Sawa, vipi uko unasikia vizuri? Haya.
Loni.
Iko sawa? Sawa, vipi uko unasikia vizuri? Haya.
Loni.
Iko sawa?
Come and give us your address and officially open this summit and allow us to create the white smoke. Thank you very much. Come and give us your address and officially open this summit and allow us to create the white smoke. Thank you very much. Come and give us your address and officially open this summit and allow us to create the white smoke. Thank you very much. Officially open this summit and allow us to create the
check. Then mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Dennis. Iko poa? Yeah. Iko fiti?
Okay, welcome back to the afternoon session. Would like to call our presenters. Dr. Adama, Protest, please come forward. Mr. Belaine from Ethiopia. Mr. Matthew Ngwai. Samuel Ruto. Samuel. Samuel. Samuel Ruto. Belaine Kine. So I'd like to invite you back to the plenary for our third session of the day. We have our chair, Mr. Matthew Ngwai from Litenga Holdings. He'll be leading our presentation today on doing business in African grain sector towards a new policy for agro-industry and grain trade. With Mr. Mungwai, you'll introduce your panelists, the rest of the participants. Welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for all of you to be here today, and We'll be discussing doing business in Africa grain sector towards a new policy for agro industry and grain trade. With me, I have various panelists here, and these panelists, as you can see, most of them are actually very experienced in this industry. So they will be sharing with us today the experiences in Africa, and probably each of us who are coming from different countries can borrow a leaf on how actually we can contribute to make a very progressive grain sector in Africa. So we have Dr. David Nyange here with us, and then we have Dr. Gideon, actually Professor David Nyange, and then we have Dr. Gideon and Protest. Later on, some two panelists again, they will be joining us. They're a little bit late, but I will go just directly to start with the discussion. But before that, I would like to say a few things. %63% of what we do basically as business in the world is basically trade. Because, for example, we don't have that many computer companies in the world. We have a few computer companies. They make most of the computers we use across the globe. But we have other actors in that particular value chain who are actually benefiting through trade, etc. So actually trade is one element that is creating wealth to so many people, creating jobs to so many people. Therefore, when we look at our continent, and basically what we need to achieve as a continent, we need to see how can we actually look to the future with an open mind, whereby trade becomes a key component of whatever we do, and particularly when it comes to the grain sector. Everybody is opening their borders. Actually, if I see that Kenya doesn't have enough harvest, to me as a Tanzanian, I will see that as a blessing, because I can be able to sell more and tell my people to produce more. So if I see South Africa, the southern part of Africa, I mean, they're having, they don't have enough harvest, that should be like an indicator to tell my people that we need to produce more and supply this market. So the growth of any particular business or any particular sector is to venture into new markets, to expand the business. Now, how do you expand the business? It's by looking and going into other markets, be able to supply into other markets. That is very important. So we see today here, for instance, we have delegates from across the world. They come here with the business. They want to expand the market. From Mexico, from everywhere, they want to sell across the borders. So that's the one way of actually growing business. So the grain sector as itself is a sector that is really depending on trade. It's depending on people to produce more and to look for further markets. We can export to other countries, other continents. So, but how do we start that? We start that by building block by block the inter-border trade. Slowly putting system in place with regard to the need of the country, but we also have to understand that certain countries, maybe they are not as productive as Tanzania or as Kenya or as Zambia. Then by knowing that, how do we take advantage of those, kind of shortcomings in those markets? How do we take advantage of that to bring prosperity to the producers in this country, to the grain traders of this country, the grain traders of this block of East Africa, the grain traders of Africa? How do we now build bit by bit for the grain business to be able to perform, to actually export to other continents, etc., etc.? So this is, for me, as a person who is in grain trade, is very important. It's critical in creation of wealth and expanding markets. So with these few words, I would like to welcome Professor David Nyange to share a little bit of his views and experience on how can we actually, in this a new policy to agro industry, how can we further our interest as a continent, but our interest as a bloc, as a country, into grain trade. Karibu, Professor.
Good afternoon. As I've been introduced, my name is David Nyange. I'm an agricultural economist, and I've been working here in the country for almost, over 15 years. I've been teaching at Sokoine University of Agriculture and then worked for USAID Tanzania. And now I'm associated with Michigan State University, overseeing one of the USAID projects here in Tanzania. So in my talk this afternoon, I'll be looking at agriculture transformation. I've been always talking about transformation of the economies. What does that transformation mean to the grain sector? Will the grain sector continue to be an important sector in the region in the wake of this transformation? What would happen at the farm level? Will the grain continue to be an important crop to farmers? And downstream the value chain, what would happen if consumption pattern is changing? So that is what I'll be looking at in my discussion. As we are all aware, Africa until recently has been experiencing rapid economic growth. But that growth has not translated into significant poverty reduction. In other words, poverty level have stayed high despite the rapid economic growth. And one of the attributable factors is lack of transformation, as transformation is very important for inclusive growth. So what do we mean by transformation? So we've been talking much about transformation, but what does that mean? What does that mean to the grain sector? Okay, I'll continue talking as okay. So transformation is very important for sustainable growth because transformation, of course, leads to specialization. As currently, most farmers are growing multiple crops, and there's, I would say, it's difficult to achieve efficiency when you are growing or you are dealing with multiple crops. And then downstream the value chains, you do also have other participants dealing with multiple commodities, and there's a loss of efficiency. And during transformation, you have high level of specialization. And at macro level, we expect the share of agriculture labor in the total labor force to decrease over time as productivity improves because of specialization and use of technology. For example, in the US, historically, the country experienced a rapid decrease in the share of agricultural labor force from over 50% about 100 years ago to now to a level of about 3%. In Tanzania, we've been talking about 70% of the population being engaged in agriculture. And the recent statistics indicate that the share of agricultural labor in total labor force has declined to 65.5%. And this trend is common across a number of countries. And this indicates that transformation has begun to take root in Africa. However, there's still more work to be done in order to accelerate that transformation. And another indicator for transformation, as the agriculture labor force decreases, one would expect the productivity to increase. This morning you heard about some statistics being quoted here that most food grains productivity has been at around 1.2 tons per hectare. When you look at macro level, sometimes it's difficult to see improvement in productivity. But when you look at individual value chains, there's some evidence of improved productivity, either in some value chains or in some areas. Another expectation is that as transformation takes place, you would see the farm sizes increase. And in the US, that information is available. And through the work that myself and my colleagues are doing, there's quite a very compelling evidence that the farm sizes in Africa are beginning to increase. So for the first time, we're talking about the emergence of medium-sized farms. As you know, in Africa, we've been always talking about the missing middle at farm level as well at the enterprise level. But for the first time, we see some signs of the rise of the medium-sized farms. For example, here in Tanzania, based on the Ag Census data, medium-sized farms account currently for about 42% of the total cultivated land. And when we talk about medium size in the Tanzanian context, we mean farms of about 5 to 200 hectares, while the average farm size is 2 hectares. So you can see that the medium-sized farms are beginning to emerge. But downstream the value chains, we also see some changes. One, of course, in consumption pattern. We see that there's a shift in consumption from the traditional staples such as cassava, maize, and others towards high-value processed as well as livestock products. For example, looking at the Tanzanian household budget survey, we see the share of maize in household consumption has started to decrease, while the share of rice has increased. Similarly, the share of livestock products, including meat and dairy products, have started to increase. And this trend, I would say, is across a good number of African countries. And this change in consumption is very much reflected also in the trade, where currently, as you heard in the morning, Africa has become a large importer of food commodities, spending almost $32 billion a year. In Tanzania here, we spend about $640 million importing various food products, while our agricultural export earns only about $800 million. So if you include fertilizer in agricultural trade, you will see sometimes we have a negative trade balance in agriculture. So the key message here is that agriculture transformation has begun in Africa, as reflected in the change in the share of agriculture labor force, but also changes in the farming structure, as you see with the rise of the medium-sized farms, but also downstream the value chain with the changes in consumption. And then there are other changes which are happening associated with the changes that I have mentioned. One, of course, is the share of individual crops in the total area that farmers are planting. For example, we see a slowdown in expansion of maize and an acceleration in the area for edible oil, as well as high-value crops like rice and legumes. It has been difficult to capture, of course, the change in the area for horticulture. As we know, horticulture tended to be less land intensive. So hopeful as we continue with the research, we might be able to capture that as we look at the revenue per hectare. So what is driving this transformation? A number of factors are attributable to the current transformation. One, of course, is the increase in food prices. And that is very evident because of the increase in population. As we know, Africa currently has 1 billion people, and it's expected that by 2050, Africa will have around 2 billion people. In Tanzania, currently, we have 50 million people, and by 2050, we expect to have 140 million people. And by then, Tanzania will be the 13th, most populous country globally. So you can see these changes that are happening. But we also see changes happening in demographics. If you look at Africa, the median age is 20 years, as compared to Europe, which is around 40 years. Asia is about 30. So that has a very big implications in the changing consumption habits that are happening. And it shows some potentials and some challenges. So then what is the perspective for the grain sector? As I mentioned, that there has been a slow in growth, in area growth for maize, and a concurrent increase in some of other commodities. So would that mean that the grain sector importance will decrease over time? When we look at the consumption habit, we see changes towards high value processed products. But also it's also interesting that consumption, especially of poultry product, is also beginning to stimulate the growth of the feed industry. So my conclusion here is that despite this transformation which is happening here, there's still a future for the grain sector. But what would happen is the kind of products that we see in the markets towards more processed products. Here in Dar es Salaam, I think you know very well the famous grain market, Tandale, which a few years ago used to trade maize, where households go there, buy maize, take it into a neighborhood milling facility and mill it for home consumption. Currently, nobody is buying maize, and that market is disappearing. And you see it's mostly now the millers that are based there. We see consolidation of the milling industry. We do have some survey statistics from the survey we did last year. So gradually we see consolidation in the hammer millers beginning to age out, and the big millers, medium-sized and large milling facilities, flourishing. We see the rise of supermarkets, and I do have some statistics showing, of course, the decline in the share of the traditional open-air markets. It was common a few years ago here in Dar es Salaam to be in the market every week, at least once every week. But currently, most people do their shopping in supermarkets. So these are the kind of transformation that needs to be taken into consideration as we do make programming for development, and also as we formulate policies. But I should not also forget a very important factor, that is rapid urbanization, where it's expected that by 2025, over 50% of Africa's population will be living in urban area. And to the food sector, it means for the first time, the majority of households will be getting their food supplies from the market and not from their own farms, as it has been traditionally. So it's good to be thinking about all these changes which are happening, so that we can align our policies and also our development agenda to make sure that it takes into consideration so as to promote inclusive development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor David Nyange. I think you need to start the seat. Adama, you need to. Yes, please. All right. So we see there is a future, according to Professor Nyange, there is a future for the grain sector. It's only that we'll be seeing more processed products in the market, as he has rightly identified. So probably we'll discuss that more, but right now I would like to welcome Adama to share your view and your thoughts on the topics at hand. The panelists, everybody has a maximum of 10 minutes, so please try to maximize on that. Karibu.
Thank you very much for, again, my presentation is yeah. So thank you very much for, my name is Adama Kulibali. I'm Chief of Agriculture, Food Security for the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, based in Addis Ababa. It's really, with all protocol observers, really my pleasure here to talk about, take this opportunity to quickly scan on through my presentation on the issue of where we are, what is at stake, where we are going regarding the grain industry, the grain trade, and what are the prospect and risk. And it's a presentation normally that I would take, I would say, require a little bit more depth. But I would scan because of my previous predecessor and intervention earlier this morning. What I want to say is first to say that we are really right now at very uncertain time, very uncertain time. And when we are in very uncertain time globally, it requires to make smart move when you don't see, when you are glad. You have to make smart move for you to get through your way and get a destination. So grain, the topics we are talking about here is very important. Why grain is important? Because all world leaders pay very much attention to what are happening to this particular industry. It's about, at global level, food security, because today, at least I would say 1 billion people globally go to bed without food. When we take it to Africa level, 230 million people go to bed without food. And the product that key to stabilize the situation is the grain sector. So grain is so important, very important. We are talking about wheat, we are talking about rice, we are talking about also corn, and the coarse grain, the other coarse grain. But here, I would say one of the most important element today, before getting to giving you the big picture about the overall trade trend, we have to say that in terms of economic growth, we have disappointing performance in the range of 3.2 to 3.5 in terms of GDP growth. When GDP growth is low, that means purchasing power will be low. That means we will not be able, actually, in particular case of Africa, to afford the food we buy. When we move now to particularly to the picture of the trade, we can say that the overall performance of trade trend in the region has been disappointing. What you see there, we are looking at comparison between the trade balance that you see in green. So for the almost for the past 3 to 4 years, Africa has moved to at a level of negative deficit. So that means that we are not performing very well in external trade. So that means we have to concentrate on where we can save. And where we can save today is intra-trade. So the intra-trade picture that you see here show also that intra-trade, actually, we haven't been, Africa has been trading very little with itself in the order of 3% of GDP, but also when you go to, in terms of percentage trading, we are at 14%. 14% intra-trading is very low. It has been a statu quo for many years. And so with that, performance has not been good in terms of intra-trade. What you see here is a comparison between, on the left, intra-trade performance for Africa, and then the structure of what we trade with the rest of the world. And you can see here in this picture also that actually when we look at this performance, Africa has been more trading with external market. And if we look at now what we are doing in intra-trade performance, we look at the structure and we see that the trading between African has been more, I would say, beneficial in terms of, because we trade more in industrial product than exporting a product to in extra trade. So we are not gaining much when we trade with the rest of the world because we are basically exporting raw material instead of exporting value-added product. But overall performance has been very low. We have 3% market share globally when it comes for trade. When you look at industrial product, we are 1.2% performance in terms of manufacturing value added. When we look at also the performance in terms of FDI, foreign direct investment, we have 3%, 3.5% in terms of global share. So basically, regarding the global picture, outside, extra trade, extra investment, extra involvement with foreign global market, Africa is losing on those markets. That is why the picture that you see here in blue give a structure. The structure of what we are, the share of Africa intermediate import by separate intermediate product in 2015. You can see in blue there for a product like food, it's very low. We are almost in the order of, I would say, 5 to 10% and below, which means between 87% of what we are trading, the different component, industrial product, intermediate product, food product. What you see in orange is basically what Africa is importing from the rest of the world. So this picture just also tells that we are actually losing. We are in engaging in extra trade, we are losing. In blue, we are not adding enough value to what we are producing. I want to move quickly on the picture of food trade. When you look at food trade, particularly, you can see here this picture, the value of food item from the rest of the world, that's on the top, and then the value of food item import from African countries. You can look at here very carefully. You'll see that per region, basically, if you look at per region, North Africa, South Africa, Eastern Africa, total Africa, we are basically importing food item in the order of 35 billion. And then when you look at what we are trading between ourselves in terms of food import, you can see for each region, the region of Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, you can see that number there. We are able to basically import food item in the order of 5 to 10 billion. That means actually the region are not poor. We have the purchasing power to buy food. Imagine a little bit that this money was injected in rural Africa. It will, as the colleague has just said earlier in his presentation, this will transform completely, making linkage between rural sector and the urban sector. So this was just to give you the picture that Africa is bleeding in terms of food, in terms of agricultural product, we are bleeding. So bleeding in the order of, I would say, 35 billion sum as mentioned. We are bleeding when we go also to other products like fuel. We are bleeding. So it doesn't mean here that there's no money in Africa. It just mean that what we are doing is not right. So it's not right. So I show you this picture to give you, if we look at also the structure, value of the top 5 food item imported from African country, you can see we have wheat, we have maize, we have rice. And the total of this that is in yellow there, it's this component that the top item, the biggest item in terms of spending. That means that grain sector is very important. The grain sector is key. If Africa is able to save 10 billion, 20 billion in this on grain, the grain product, that means we can save big. So this is very important to underline here the importance of the grain industry for Africa and to see what can be done. So there is opportunity all the way, all around across Africa. If you go to Tanzania, as I highlight here, Tanzania is spending some 200 million, in terms of food item. You go also to other countries like Nigeria, we are spending also million, 400 to, across Africa. You go to North Africa, you go to East Africa, you go to Central Africa, all those countries are importing rice, are importing wheat, are importing maize, which means that we need to come out with a strategy, different strategy. It doesn't mean that we don't have the money. We have the resource to really change the picture. We have to change mindset. And then that's why I say we have to rethink right the concept, the rule also of the game. We have to look at Africa as one. Africa as one. So I put this picture to traditionally as actually Africa is unique. If we take Africa in terms of climatic zone, we can come out with 15 to 14 clusters. And those are the 12 clusters that you have there. Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda are on the same cluster. So we have to start thinking in terms of cluster. When we do think in terms of cluster, it means Africa has the ability to produce 12 months all year around. And with that position, Africa is the only continent that spread across the equator. No other continent is in that unique position. So this position, this understanding has not happened yet fully by, at the level of policymakers to look at Africa as the only continent globally in position to produce 12 months, over 12 months. So, but some of the product that we can put this to use is the grain sector. So I just wanted to highlight that, to be able to take advantage of this potential or that unicity that Africa has. There are a number of things to do. Africa needs to invest 93 billion to resolve, to connect Africa in terms of infrastructure. If that doesn't happen, even if we erase all the barriers today among ourselves, we cannot be competitive. So this is the left part. To move from those positions we have now, to have a situation where we have also across Africa a strategy of building agro and agro-pole, building an industrial park, you have to be able to resort to finance basically this aspect so that you can move also to this last picture, that figure 6.3, where we can create across Africa regional value chain of wheat, of maize, and rice, and be able to say across Africa in terms of food product. So this is what I wanted to say on that one. Here I put these numbers to tell you, compare a little bit a number of regions, a number of countries in terms of cereal yield performance. When you look at the cereal yield performance of a country in the ESCG region compared to Thailand, compared to Cuba, compared to Saudi Arabia, you can see here, even Cuba, we've embargo all of this, Cuba is producing more as a higher yield than a number of countries that has no embargoes, you know. So we cannot be, looking at this number to say what is not working, why we are not able to be productive in terms of yield, cereal yield. You can see here our yield performance is very low in terms of rice, in terms of maize, in terms of corn. But at the same time, you can see country like Egypt. You can see country like where Egypt is able to make something like 7,000, even 10,000 kilogram per hectare. So when you look at this carefully, it means that most of countries, they are back to back, next to one another, they are not really cooperating. So there is need to have clear arrangement so that the knowledge that next door can be shared to above the border for us to raise our capacity to produce 10 ton per hectare for rice, to be able to go to 6 ton per hectare for maize, and so and so. So this reality is what we are facing, what our farmers are facing. So there's need to really intervention. Some of those countries like Vietnam, like Thailand, like Pakistan, where we are importing rice from, those are countries that don't have particular advantage than our small farmers. So this is the picture. So productivity can be improved, but it will take really effort to make that. When you look at also agricultural value added per capita, you can see that Africa is the green one, just completely low. For this past 20 years or 30 years, agricultural value added per worker has been the lowest in the world, in the order of 4,000, when the US, the blue line, is completely like 80,000. So this means that this gap is wide. We have wide gap in cereal yield. When we move from production box to the value adding box, we have also wide gap. These two pictures mean that there's really need to engage in cooperation. There is really need to promote integration. There really need to actively involve, this sector to take advantage of this gap. So this, beyond this one, this picture is basically on the horizontal line. You have agricultural value added per capita, and then on the horizontal line, you have GDP per capita. So you can see here, that area, that circle is where most of African countries are concentrated. It means that the idea of, for you to have high income, like earlier it was mentioned that Tanzania want to go from low income to middle income. If Tanzania is growing at 3%, 3.5% for example, or even 4%, for Tanzania to be growing at that rate, which is not what is happening totally now, it will take 126 years, 126 years for a country growing at 4%, 3.5% to reach the level of 10,000, which means that we are not really measuring what we are, the task we have at hand as policymakers. We need to make sure that we understand what this means. You have to, for us to add, to get to high income, like the highest over there is 50,000 Singapore. You have a number of countries that were able to move from the bottom rung to the high rung because they were able to increase the agricultural value added per capita. That is the vertical line. So this is what I want to also highlight. It's a priority for us to add value to rice. It's a priority to add value to maize, to add value to wheat. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. There's no excuse on that because the technology exists, the capacity exists, we have everything, we have even more than those countries where we are importing from. So I will give, you will have the presentation with for all of the explanation. But what I want to say here is the priority is not only to increase yield. Yield has already been increased across Africa. You go to Senegal, we are making 6 ton. Even here, we are making in some areas 8 ton per hectare for rice and in some place for corn. You go to Namibia, we are making the best in wheat in terms of performance in yield. So what is wrong then for our region not to be able to engage in integration arrangement, cooperation arrangement, so that we can take advantage of this reality that we have on the ground. So I'm running out of time, so I will quickly summarize. What we need here, the question is farming, saying in the word, in the mouth, farming should be a business. Just saying it. This is really to take it seriously. For farming to move to be as a business, for our economy to be led by agribusiness, it doesn't mean just to put it on paper. It requires that government invest massive amount of money in our in rural industrialization. They invest a lot of money to train our farmers. All this element recommendation has been done, but for the moment, it's not implemented. So. Their own legs by just raising tariffs everywhere across the continent. These are things that we can just simply remove. It's easy. I mean, ECA, we are make ton of remove. If you remove the tariff, this is the benefit for our economy. We will move this economy to where we are now in the order of billion to trillion. But if we keep the statu quo, just taking rice, we keep the statu quo at the rate we are eating rice, at the rate we are eating maize, we are talking about a drain from Africa in terms of trillion, just for rice. Trillion. By 2050, we are talking about spending trillion to be able to feed the population that Africa will have by that time. Right now we are 1.4 billion. By 2050, we'll double to 2.5. By 2100, by the end of the century, Africa will have 4 billion. So the epicenter of food insecurity will be Africa. So Africa will be hot spot, but Africa can become hook spot if we can start to look at carefully solving the problem of the grain industry. That is why I am very pleased to thank the opportunity that ESGC gave me to talk about the grain. I have a lot to say because I cover all the economy in the continent in terms of grain issues. Grain is key. Grain sector is the most important. On the continent, I know very well the continent. The position that EAGC has to have a platform where we organize the private sector. This is crucial. This is very important. I'm telling you, if you look at globally, the global picture, today you look at Asia, there is no land there. There's no water there. There's no possibility to increase production there. If you look at Europe, Europe also is in deficit. Europe is also at risk. You look at America, there's no land there, there's no water there. And even people are using toilet today to grow food, to be able to sell, to be able to eat. And even with climate change now, all these economies are at risk. I don't have a lot of time, unfortunately, but what I want to say here, it's important that the rethinking that opportunity that EACG has given us, I am very grateful for that to be able to talk, to be part of that thinking. ECA, the Economic Commission for Africa, as a mother tank for on the think tank on the continent since 1958. We are ready to accompany this region. I'm telling you, Tanzania, the minister talked this morning, Tanzania is one of the countries that has also unique position on the planet because Tanzania is on the equator. It means that this country is blessed. Same also for the continent. Africa is blessed because Africa is the only continent that can also produce 12 months, over 12 months. The only condition is to unite, to have an integrated Africa. So what is missing is platform for implementation. There's no platform for execution. There's no platform at continental level for monitoring and evaluation. So programs like CADEP are on paper, are not implemented fully. A number of programs like industrial program exists also on paper, they are not implemented. A number of agreements are on paper, they are not implemented. So what we need are platform, but platform implementation platform that driven by private sector. So that's why this platform that EACG has should be converted in a platform for implementation, for execution, for monitoring and evaluation of grain policy in this region. If we do that, I'm telling you, we will be able to not only produce to feed Tanzania, to feed the whole region, because across the region, I tell you, there is a high demand. The minister was talking this morning about rice, about issue of uncertainty concern. I was disturbed on my seat, to be frank, because to tell you, you go anywhere today across the continent, we are in deficit in high demand of rice. You go anywhere also, we are in high demand of wheat. North Africa alone is spending 20 billion. Country next to Egypt, like Ethiopia, Sudan, they are not taking advantage of that. If you go to Congo, DRC is also importing massive amount of rice, maize that we can do. And DRC is part of this organization. So you go to even the leading economy, which is Nigeria. Nigeria is importing billion, drained by billion in rice, billion in maize, billion in wheat. You take South Africa with the shock we have recently on the drought. South Africa, also one of the heavyweight economy, is also at risk because South Africa is not able also to feed itself in terms of wheat, even in terms of corn. So this means that it's an opportunity for the private sector, that member of this organization, to size, to measure the importance of your organization. I will not elaborate too long because I have exhausted my time, but I want to just underscore that grain is the key product, it's a very important.
Thank you. You may sit, Adam. This has been a very hot topic. Just to reiterate that we are at actually we are at 35 billion US dollars on imports of food and grain. So I would like to very much welcome Dr. Gideon to at least share a few thoughts on particularly on the policy issue that we could look at to unlock the potential that we have. Karibu.
Asante. So, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. The two presenters before me, Adama, has made it very clear that grain is big business. It's important. It's really crucial, and it has great potential. David also mentioned something that, for me, is a wake-up to anybody who is in policy in Africa. And that is the fact that you have a growing medium-scale production sector in the grain sectors in Africa. Why it is important is that, and there is a representative from Zambia here who will confirm that that site is growing very massively. You have young professionals who would gradually prepare to enter into farming, and they don't wait till retirement before they go to the farm. And they are doing that because they see farming as a business. So if policy doesn't catch up with those people, they will vote out very quickly with their feet, and we will be in a big, big crisis. Because if smallholder farmers have not worried too much about policy because they know when they complain, nobody will listen, those medium-scale producers will not do the same. So it is time for policy to wake up and match the prospects that the sector offers and ensure that we take full advantage of it. Now, so the evidence is very clear that grain trade business is big business. There are some projections which indicate that even for maize alone, demand within Eastern Africa is estimated at about $16.7 billion. And this is much more than the total value of coffee which is produced within the region. So if governments have paid attention to coffee, to tea, and to those so-called traditional exports. It's about time that attention was paid to maize, not only in terms of food security at domestic level, but also in terms of the potential for export within the regional markets. One of the things that usually people talk about when talking about grain trade policy is that we have to first of all make sure that our people are well fed before we feed our neighbors. And it presumes that it is a single direction activity where grain is always moving from the surplus producing countries like Tanzania and Uganda into a country with structural deficit like Kenya. But that is not the case. There is evidence to clearly demonstrate that the movement is in two ways. It flows in reverse direction depending on the prices. And quite recently in July, evidence that we got from Better Trade, which is based in Kenya, suggested that maize was being imported from Kenya into Uganda simply because it was cheaper in Kenya than it was in Uganda, which tells us this, that if we allow the trade to flourish, the trade itself will balance out deficits in countries at different times depending on what the supply situation is, and that will enable us better cope with the challenges that climate change is creating in terms of domestic capacity to sustain the same level of production. And one of the things that we need to recognize is that when the trade is happening, it's not just traders who are, producers are able to benefit because they have a market which absorbs any surplus that will lead to a crisis if they cannot sell. And consumers are also able to obtain a relatively more stable and relatively cheaper product which will keep them in business. And the good thing about grain is that if the economy doesn't do well and people's purchasing power is not rising, they will go for grain because it is the cheapest option. If the economy prospers so that people now have a taste for more polished, more processed products and products like eggs, milk, sugar, and the rest, then the sector will still be in a position to supply the raw materials which can be processed. So it doesn't really matter the shape of the economy. The sector still remains important, and policy needs to be doing all it can to support it. We took some figures that were published by the organization that is based in Nairobi, and we looked at figures for April, May, and what we found very interesting was that at the time when these figures were published, the price per ton of maize in Nairobi was around $470. Now, in an efficient, well-integrated marketing system, what you will expect is that the price in the surplus producing market would only be marginally higher than the price, if you add transport costs to it, the price in the consumer market should only be marginally higher than the price in the consumer market, producing market plus transport cost. That margin being the spread that those who are in the middle, the trading and distribution agents, are taking. But if you look at the figures, it is very frightening that most in the two major markets that we looked at, in Mbeya in Tanzania and Gulu in Uganda, about 90% plus of the margin was still there as something that would be creamed out. Now, if as a minister you are looking at these figures, you say, oh, there goes the middlemen. They are cheating the consumer by making the consumer pay more, and they are cheating the farmer by paying very little to that farmer. The reality is that that is not what is happening. There are a number of factors that are accounting for this, and we want to look at them pretty quickly. Steve Orr, when he made a presentation this morning, just to show that I was listening to the talks in the morning, he talked about a number of factors, including infrastructure constraints. And I remember somebody was asking about why a person from Mexico was talking about why the huge gap in terms of transport cost. And it is very clear, if you look at most of the countries in the region, if you take the transport cost over rural roads and compare them to the transport cost over the well-tarred asphalt roads, the difference is shocking. It's about 4 to 5 times for the rural roads compared to the well-run roads. So if government wants to reduce and sustain lower prices for consumers, but at the same time ensure that producers get the best, then one of the areas that they need to look into is investment in the fiscal infrastructure in the rural areas. And it also means that they should be looking at investment or promoting investment in storage infrastructure, because we all talk very easily about climate change and weather risks, but studies conducted by IFAD in a number of African countries, including Uganda and Ethiopia, suggest that post-harvest losses, even in a normal year, are much higher than the losses that are incurred as a result of production loss if there is severe drought. This is something that is within our control, and I believe that it is important that policy pays attention to it. Lack of finance is an issue, and I know that tomorrow there's a session to discuss it, so I wouldn't get into it very much. But I also know from work within the region and in other parts of Africa that one of the major reasons banks are reluctant to get into trade finance is simply because of the policy uncertainty. And they wouldn't do it until they know that if somebody is contracting to sell maize from Gulu into Nairobi, that nobody is going to create a problem when that person gets paid. If those set along with a group of outgrower farmers lost business and was almost out of that business simply because that type of intervention led to a collapse of prices and they could not sustain their commitment to the floor price that they had negotiated with the farmers. So that type of intervention led to but I believe that the most commonly known among all these restrictions is that of the export bans. Almost every time they come up, and in Tanzania, I know that the minister said that officially there is no export ban. 2 years ago, when Johannes and I were involved in some work here, we were told that the president had announced that there is no export ban. Yet, in one of the regions, which is closest to Kenya, where a lot of the maize trade occurs, the provisional governor or whoever was in charge had imposed his own restrictions, and those were very heavily enforced. Those sort of policies may appear to tell the public, I am doing something in terms of protecting you food security-wise, but the evidence that has been accumulated for many countries and over many years suggests that that is not working, and we need to change tack. Taxation policies, somebody has mentioned them, so I wouldn't go too much into them, but at least I know from the conversations that I've been having with some of you that by the imposition of certain taxes, the technology for storage which is available in the form of hermetic bags is not being taken up by farmers because that is driving up the cost beyond what the farmers can afford. Why are these bottlenecks still there? And I think the minister made the story very clear. A couple of reasons. One, government wants to assure food security. Two, they want to be able to promote value addition within the domestic economy. They want to also be able to encourage productivity increase at the domestic farm level. But the question is, can all those policy objectives be achieved while still encouraging free trade? And for me, the most heartening presentation I've heard today, the one from Mexico, tells me that it is possible, because they are giving us evidence to show that when you allow free trade, you can actually trigger substantial increase in output and productivity. It is a way to go, and the formulas to do that are not high-tech, are not beyond our means. It is something that we can really do. And for me, the most amazing case to substantiate this is actually not from any case that has been written now, but it was written in the Bible, in the second book of the Bible, Exodus, which means that should be more than 10,000 years old. And that case was documented, not for drought in one season, But drought for 7 years, 7 solid years, no production. But Egypt was able to still engage in regional trade in grains. You may ask me how I know that for a fact. I won't say that now. If you ask me, then I'll give you the evidence. But in the 7 years, Egypt was able to feed its population and still engage in regional grain trade because of things that they did. And I believe that those formulas are still applicable in our day and age if we do them using the instruments that are available to us. Now, so if we want to go forward in terms of policy, then I have 2 pictures there. Which one? Do we pick the left or the right? In the past, the debate was over political or ideological left and ideological right. This time, it is not ideological left or right. It is the picture left or the picture right. Because the picture right on the left is showing somebody who is engaging in grain trade during an export ban. He cannot go over the normal route, so he's going over the Panyan route with his bicycle. That is only increasing the cost of trading and reducing the margin for farmers, at the same time increasing the consumer price. If the right picture is done, where we allow the trade to move freely, then I believe that that cost of distribution can be reduced to the benefit of consumers and also producers. And how are we going to get there? Basically, what I would suggest is that let's get back to trading in the most efficient manner, which is trade where if I want to buy maize from you, I don't have to come to your house to count the number of bags and to test the grains with my fingers. It is trade which involves me picking a phone and saying, I have seen that you have 10,000 bags of maize, and it is grade 1, EAC grade 1. That is what I want. How much do you want for it? We negotiate the deal, 5 minutes we agree, I instruct my banks to pay you, and I take delivery. That is what we do when we are buying rice from Thailand. I don't see many traders going from here to Thailand and going from village to buy bags of rice. They just do it by phone. It is simpler because everything is structured. Let's go for the structured trading systems that EAGC is involved in promoting. And I'm saying that not because I just believe that those systems can work, but it is because it is the most effective and efficient way to trade. Everything is structured. When you say grade, you know the grade we are talking about. I visited a town which is very active in Tanzania called Kebaigwa. I just love that town because in that community, what used to happen is if you have maize to sell, you just put it on the roadside and hope that a Kenyan trader or any other trader will buy it from you. Then they decided, no, this is not helping. Let's put structures to streamline this trade. So they put a weigh bridge, so you weigh the maize, a laboratory to test the quality, a drying facility to dry it if you need to dry it, and a cleaner to clean it out and make sure that you don't carry stones from Kebaigwa into
assessment program.